G'day YouTube, NecroarcanistXIII here with the next part of Strange Unsolved Mysteries by Margaret Ronan. Chapter 6, I think it is? No, Chapter 7, A Dream of Disaster. Now I've been thinking, even though I was planning on uploading 3 chapters a day on a 2 daily basis, I might actually change to 1 daily basis if possible, just to try and get this out of the way so I can make more videos. I'm still trying to set up for finishing my Constantine Let's Play, and then I might play The Suffering or finish Silent Hill, and then there's another game I might play if I can figure out a glitch that happened last time I tried to play it. But anyway, all that aside, let's just move on to The Dream of Disaster. On the night of July 3rd, 1944, Mrs. Amy Bond woke shuddering from an eerily vivid dream. Every detail stood out clearly in her mind. I seemed to be suspended in space above an island in the Pacific. I could see a long sweep of beach below me. To the right of the beach were some scrubby-looking trees, under which some Marines crouched. I recognized one of the Marines as my son. He was aiming up towards the hill beyond him with a thing that looked like a long pipe. As Mrs. Bond watched in her dream, she could see enemy guns firing down upon the Marines from the hill. She could also see other Marines crawling through what seemed to be high grass, with sticks protruding above leaves. She got the impression that the crawling Marines were trying to get up the hill. Then I saw 2 Marines coming down the hill, she recalled, carrying someone on a stretcher. The man on the stretcher was covered by a blanket. When the Marines got to where my son was standing beneath the trees, they put the stretcher down on the ground beside him. I could see my son talking to the men. Suddenly the top of the hill seemed to explode in flames. Smoke poured out and pieces of metal rained down. Everything was enveloped in flames. The weapon my son was using was torn to bits. He now lay on the ground, and there was something terribly wrong with his arms and legs. His eyes were closed, and his face was black, but he was still breathing. I was screaming and trying to get close enough to do something for him, but I couldn't seem to reach the beach. The person on the stretcher was still now, and I knew he was dead. It was not given to me to see what else happened. The dream ended, and I woke up. The dream haunted Mrs. Bond all day. It could so easily have been true. World War II was raging, and her son was a Marine, serving in the South Pacific. He could easily have landed on one of those islands and still held by the Japanese forces. Later in the day, Mrs. Bond received a letter from her son. He wrote that he was well, but she did not feel reassured. She put off going to bed until late, afraid she might again have the nightmare. "The last time I looked at the clock," she said, "it was 3 AM. Shortly before 5 in the morning, I woke in a cold sweat. I had dreamed the whole horrible thing again. It was so etched in my mind that I got out of bed and made a sketch of what I had seen." By the morning of July 5th, Mrs. Bond was convinced that she had dreamed twice had actually happened, thousands of miles away in the South Pacific. Again that night, she postponed falling asleep as long as she could, but again she dreamed that same dream. When I awoke, I decided to write to my daughter-in-law. I wrote that my son had been wounded, and she would soon hear from the Navy. I told her not to worry because the wound would not be fatal. The message that Mrs. Bond had predicted came to her daughter-in-law weeks later. It said that her husband had been wounded and was recuperating on the hospital ship Comfort. Then came a message from Mrs. Bond's son. Got hurt but not bad enough to come home. Mrs. Bond realised that on July 3rd, 4th and 5th, she had been dreaming of the future. At that time, the Navy was planning to invade the Japanese-held island of Guam. Mrs. Bond's son was one of the Marines who made the first landing, and one of those who were badly wounded. When the war was over and her son was home again, Mrs. Bond showed him a sketch that she made of her dream. He shook his head in astonishment and said, "If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you made this drawing right on the scene. It's as accurate as if you were there." What Mrs. Bond had sketched was the beach at Guam. The grass with sticks protruding above leaves was a sugarcane field through which the Marines crawled to reach the fortified hill. "But who was the man on the stretcher?" Mrs. Dean worried. "PFC Thompson," her son replied. "He shouldn't have been in battle at all. The commanding officer had just found out he was only 16. He was going to send him back to the States, but he never made it. He died there on the beach when the guns blew up. There's something terrible about a kid like Thompson getting killed on an island 6,000 miles from home." Mrs. Bond understood how her son felt, for she too had seen PFC Thompson die. What do you think about the dream of disaster? Do you think that Mrs. Bond had actually foreseen the future? Let me know in the comments what you think about it. But before I end the video, I'm actually going to tell a very short story about my own mum actually having a premonition of disaster. We were living in a house on the other side of town, on the north side. And I was probably about 9 or 10 years old then. Never actually knew about this until years later. But she said that she saw an apparition of an old lady in white trying to call out to her. And then when she went to investigate, she found that the water boiler had burst open and there was water all over the floor. And if she had not realised what had happened, then when me or my little sister would wind up running through that area, we could have been electrocuted by the water on the ground. And she claims that the apparition had either been one of her great-great-grandmothers or somebody else distantly related. It's sort of fuzzy to remember all the details, but I do actually remember coming home at one point and finding water all over the floor in the back hallway, and Mum was trying to keep me away from there. So it's just funny to think what may have gone down there, where that apparition may have come from. Because my mum is quite superstitious. She apparently knew all the ghosts that have lived in all the houses we have lived in. She even claimed that I'm just trying to think. I remember several months ago my Uncle Dane had gotten a new puppy for the kids, and it looked remarkably like old dog Patience. And Mum reckoned that we had Patience put down a while back. It was actually during when I was doing my Terraria expert mode videos. There was an episode dedicated to her because she was put down on the day of recording. And yeah, Mum said that Patience was hanging around for a little while, and she believed that she was waiting for us to get another dog so that she knew her humans were being protected. But eventually she got sick of waiting and moved on somewhere else. And at the same time, not at the same time, a while beforehand, well, my grandfather died a couple years ago now, but it would have been last year, around August. Some of the family came around to do a memorial thing, scattering some of the ashes on my nan's grave, like his wife's grave. And when we got back home, we were taking pictures in the driveway. There were a lot of strange orbs floating around in the background, and Mum claimed that it would have been Pop hanging around to say goodbye because his brothers were waiting for him up the hill. Something like that. There are a few other weird coincidences afterwards because Mum was opening a box of old things and she accidentally released a feather which flew apart into 7 different pieces. One for her and her 4 brothers and 2 sisters. So one for each of my pop's kids. And then just the day afterwards, I found what was left of a dead bird. Obviously one of the cats in the street had eaten it. But what was left behind were 7 feathers held together by a single patch of skin. And I thought that that was a very, very weird coincidence, given that Mum found the pieces of feather just the day before, so I brought it home. And I think it's still around here somewhere. I haven't seen it since we moved house. Anyway, enough about me rambling of some weird ghost experiences. Gotta try and keep this video short. So until next time, this is NecroarcanistXIII signing off. Good night YouTube, and stay classy.